You know, Ascend Church is not just some service to the public or some club. It is a family. And the pastors of this church take it very seriously. I heard the invitation that from this pulpit that we want to meet you afterwards. And I'd like you to take, if you're visiting here, to take it seriously, because we are family. There's only one God, one Savior, one church. And wherever you find yourself, we are all family. And we'd like to meet you and serve you in some way and help you in your life. That's what Ascend Church is. We're a family. You can't pick your family. You can pick your friends, but you're stuck with family. Boy, that was a happy thing. All right, so my name is Ed Traut. I'm husband of one wife. I have 3 children, and I have 10 grandchildren. I live in San Antonio, Texas. I was born and raised in Cape Town, South Africa, and I'm what's known as a born-again African-American, born-again Jewish African-American. My family settled in South Africa as a result of a refugee ship that brought them there from the Holocaust. And that's how my little history goes. All right, so I will teach, if you'll let me teach you this morning. I have a specific goal or plan in mind where I want to go and teach and deposit inside of my family of God here this morning from the book of John. We have 4 Gospels that are given to us, and Matthew and Luke both have verses from the book of Mark, exactly word for word in the Hebrew. They are, in fact, in Matthew, there are 22 verses that are exactly the same as the book of Mark. But the book of John doesn't have any of that. John was completely unique as a man, as a writer, as an apostle. He was only 18 years old, John was, when he met Jesus. He was a young teenager, and he lived, unlike any other apostles, he lived to be an old person and died of old age. All the other apostles were crucified, died, persecuted, all kinds of ways that they were dealt with, but not John. John died as an old person on an island called Patmos, and he was in his 90s. And he wrote this book, supposedly by the theologians and by the historians. He wrote this book of John in Ephesus, which was a very popular place for Christians to live and be. And he wrote that there with the help of his Turkish converts that were martyrs later, and they helped him write this book of John. His John book is not a historical book or just to give an account only of the doings and happenings of Jesus, but rather to try and focus on the message. The beginning of the book of John starts with, in the beginning was the Word, rather than the birth of John the Baptist or the virgin birth. He focused on the whole message in total. He also inserts things that neither Matthew, Mark, or Luke have or refer to, and some of the teachings, like the famous John 15 about the vine and the branches, and about the woman caught in the act of adultery. That nobody else gives those accounts but John. And there are many others that go on that. But there are 2 very specific things that I want to talk to you about this morning. In Jerusalem, which was a big part of the life of Jesus, the temple, we had many miracles, but not one of them was tabulated or spoken of, except 2 of them which come from John. Never was it described what miracles took place in Jerusalem. The 2 miracles that took place, both took place on different days on a Shabbat, a Sabbath. Now, I know you Gentiles do not grasp what it means to us, what Shabbat means to us. For a Jew, about Friday afternoon, 3 o'clock, we are already focused on Shabbat, and they will normally take off work on the Friday afternoon to shop, to get organized for the evening, because it's a big thing for the family to come together when we celebrate Shabbat. Mother lights the candles, and a candle burns until the Shabbat is over. And children have to participate, and it's much like communion in many ways, too, when we do the Shabbat. Only this time we don't use the unleavened bread, we use leavened bread, which is actually platted. And it's kila, and it's platted because we remember the slavery that we were bound with, and like arms folded, we had slavery. And of course the father will always speak blessing over his children and his family at Shabbat. When I grew up, I would often want to go to the movies on a Friday evening or do something fun. And I had to wait for my Orthodox Jewish friends. I lived in a Jewish community in Cape Town between 3 different synagogues. And I always had to wait, and it was always so difficult because the ones that were Orthodox were very devoted. But Shabbat is very special to any devoted Jew, and the more legalistic or devoted you are, the more stringent you are about Shabbat. I was just there in March in Jerusalem, and I drove my team, my actual staff, I took them to Jerusalem, to Israel, and I drove them through a neighborhood that was Orthodox, which means Jews that are very devoted. Everybody, male, female, child, were all dressed in black from head to toe. Men have curls on the side of their face, and I could explain all that to you, but I don't have time. Women would have wigs. I could explain that to you too, but there's lots of reasons. And then they have young kids. As quick as they are legally allowed to get married, they marry them off. We don't do the whole falling in love thing. We have matchmakers, and they're professionally paid, and they study, and they work very hard to bring right people together. And we don't know of divorce amongst the Orthodox Jews. It's not heard of. And they're very happy marriages because what's love got to do with it? I'm kidding now. But they really learn and they grow together from a young age. But they get married as quick as they can to have as many children as possible because they're pushing the Orthodox thing as fast as they can to grow a Jewish community in Israel. But why I'm telling you all this is they are so devout and so devoted to the Jewish faith and legalism that it's common knowledge, even though there's several blocks in this neighborhood, nobody drives through that neighborhood on Shabbat. Nobody. Because it has been historically in newspapers where the Orthodox Jews will stone your car if you drive through their neighborhood on a Shabbat. That's how strong they are about the faith. They want to return Israel back to serving God, and that's what they believe is the way, the legalism. But Shabbat's very special, and anybody that follows the law, and when they refer in the Bible to sinners, when they talk about tax collectors and sinners, those sinners are people not Orthodox. They're not following the law. They don't go to shul or synagogue on Sunday or Saturdays. They don't do the things they're supposed to do, so they're called sinners. They just don't hang out. Don't hang out with that family. They're sinners because they're not Orthodox. And so Jesus healed 2 people on Shabbat of all the days to pick. But the one I'm picking up, I'm going to do one specific teaching on one in John chapter 5. For those who want to follow me, and I'd like you to follow me, so if you read it and hear it, it stays with you much longer. John chapter 5 and verse 1 reads like this. It says, some time later, Jesus went up to Jerusalem for one of the Jewish festivals. We have 7 basic festivals given to us by Moses. We're required to attend 3 of them. 3 of the festivals are all surrounded what you call Easter, which is the Passover. It's a very special time. We have 3 different festivals all merging together. We have, of course, the sacrifice, one where we sacrifice the lamb, which is the Passover, Pascha, and it starts usually on a Friday, and we eat lamb, and we start then with the unleavened bread, which is called the Feast of Unleavened Bread, for 7 days. By the 3rd day, we have the First Fruits Festival. And so they all coincide with the death and life of Christ, and I really haven't got time to teach that to you, how parallel it is. But there's also a festival that was included that we find in John, you guys know it as at Christmas time as Hanukkah. But it's a festival of lights and came only 180 years before Christ. It was a very new festival. But he attended festivals because that's where the Jews were, all the devout Jews were, that were really serious about God. Now, for those who've not been to Jerusalem, the temple area, the time of Christ, Herod rebuilt the temple, and it was in the time of Jesus, Jerusalem was the greatest, most beautiful city you can imagine. In fact, there was a slogan in Hebrew that would say something like, if the one who has not seen Jerusalem has not seen a beautiful city. Because Herod was a formidable, powerful builder. And he wanted to do better than Solomon, who was very wealthy. He built a platform called the Temple Mount. This Temple Mount's the size, even today, of 12 football fields. And you could have 3,000 people on this Temple Mount at any given festival. And the outer perimeter of it, before the first step, is called the Court of the Gentiles. And in the Court of the Gentiles, they had all these tables where they exchanged money, because you had certain temple money. And then they had also, would sell animals and food and everything else. And there is some of the tables that Jesus turned over. He couldn't turn them all. There was way too many. It was a demonstration of a lot of what he did was symbolic and demonstrative for spiritual reasons. He did a lot of things for spiritual reasons. And he didn't explain it to his disciples. That was always tickled me. They're on the mount with the transfiguration, and we have Moses and Elijah, and when he comes down, he tells Peter, tell no one until I'm gone about this. He didn't want anybody to know about that. He had a very strategic plan of the kingdom he was establishing and the whole plan God had given him, and he didn't share all the stuff with his disciples. He just didn't. As he doesn't share with you what he's doing in your life, because you don't understand it. You may find it very complicated in your life. Now, listen. So in this festival now, the time of this goes up to Jerusalem, and there was near Jerusalem a sheep gate. In Jerusalem, we have 7 gates, officially. The sheep gate is now known as the Lion Gate, which is just north of where the temple wall ends. And you come into the north and you head west, and you'll find right away the Pool of Bethesda. The water is very symbolic and very important in Israel, and a holy pool is called a mikveh. And a mikveh is where there's no bubbles, and you can actually get sanctified, or you wash yourself. When you come up the southern steps, where Jesus often preached, the Holder arches, there are 5 of them. I hope I'm not overloading with information now. You go up these stairs. Right at the bottom of the stairs were many little mikvahs. You'd pay a little tax, and you'd go down the one side. There's a wall. You come up the other side. It was a cleansing process, very fast cleansing process. Baptism and ceremonial washing was very normal and traditional for Jews. There was a group that was very tight, and if you come with me, I'll explain it all to you, called the Hessians. And they started a monastery down in the desert, or at the Dead Sea, and they did the ceremonial mikveh washing every single day. And John the Baptist was almost part of them. He spent some years there, and right when they were going to make him one of them, he then pulled out to start his ministry. But he was used to the baptism and their teachings, and it came through in his actual ministry, and I thought you might find that interesting. I'm really boring. I'm sorry. I don't mean to bore you. Sorry, guys. I'm trying hard to get this message across to you. But this Pool of Bethesda was an interesting pool. The reason why, it's in the very north, and the water comes from the earth, and it bubbles because, I can tell you this geographically several reasons, so they have to spill it over into another pool which does not bubble, and that's the Sanctification Pool. Now, tradition says that if someone is sick and they touch it when it does bubble, they'll get healed because an angel touched the water. And it says in my Bible, it says they're in Jerusalem near the sheep gate, a pool which is called, in Aramaic, is called Bethesda, which is surrounded by 5 covered colonnades. A colonnade is a series of pillars with a roof on it. So there's 5 of these huge colonnades. Here, a great number, a lot of people that were disabled. There were people who used to lie, the blind, the lame, the paralyzed. All these people there are all sick, seriously ill. They've been laying there, some of them for years. One who was there had been an invalid for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and learned that he had been in the condition, he learned it. God didn't show it to him. He learned it. Someone told him. For a long time he asked, do you want to get well? What kind of question is that? Now, I'm just sitting here because I've got nothing else to do. I mean, really, what a strange question to ask someone that's sick. Do you want to get well? And the funny thing is, where does he ask anybody else that? They usually chase him down to get healed. They break open roofs to lower people down to him. Constantly, they pursue him. They touch his garment behind without him knowing. They really want to get healed. And here he's offering his services to someone, not preaching the kingdom, not preaching the gospel. He asks him, do you want to get well? And he says, sir, I have no one to help me into the pool when the water is stirred. While I'm trying to get in, someone else goes down ahead of me. Then Jesus said, get up, pick up your mat, and walk. I'm not sure why it was so important to pick up the mat. But once the man was cured, and he picked up his mat and walked. He hasn't walked for 38 years. The day on which this took place was Sabbath, Shabbat. And so the Jewish leaders said to the man who had been healed, it is Shabbat. The Lord forbids you to carry your mat. Jesus, you had to tell him to carry his mat. You couldn't just say, get up and walk. Really, Jesus, come on now, let's work together here. But he replied, the man who made me well said to me, pick up your mat and walk. So they asked him, who is this fellow who told you to pick up your mat and walk? The man who was healed had no idea. He had no idea. So all Jesus did was heal one man amongst a whole horde of invalid and sick people. Nothing makes sense to you. What about these people? Why wouldn't you share? Why wouldn't you pray for a few more? Why wouldn't you at least preach the kingdom to these guys? They're not going anywhere. Why was it only one person? It's like you walked in there deliberately wanting to heal someone. And only one person. You looked, and when you heard he was lame, it was like you were deliberately looking for a specific type of sickness. He wasn't blind, he was lame. And so he says that the man who was healed had no idea it was, for Jesus slipped away into the crowd that was there. He slipped away. He didn't carry on ministering. Later, Jesus finds him in the temple, says to him, see, you are well again. Stop sinning, or something worse may happen to you. And I'm going, sinning, Jesus? He's been an invalid for 38 years, laying there. What could he possibly have to stop doing? How strange is that? The sinning, I've learned, the longer I've known him, and the more I've studied the word, the more I realize the real sin is not receiving Christ. That's the real sin. When you meet God face to face, when you close your eyes on this earth, that's what he's going to ask you. Did you receive my son or not? That's the only question he's going to ask you. Not how good you were and how well you behaved. That's not it. Because we're all sinners, saved by grace. And if the 1 John 1:8 says, if you say that you have no sin, not that you haven't sinned, that you have no sin, you're lying. So at any given point, we need Jesus. Got it? Okay, good. So the man went away and told the Jewish leaders that it was Jesus who had made him well. So because Jesus was doing these things on a Sabbath, the Jewish leaders began to persecute him. In his defense, Jesus said to them, my Father is always at work to this very day. He's always been working. And I too am working. So here's the thing. What I want to teach you today, I'm starting out now, is God's at work in your life. You just don't see it, understand it, or know it. And here's what happened. You wonder why Jesus didn't explain to anybody, because the other miracle this was in the north, higher part of the plateau towards the back or the north side of Jerusalem. The very southern part, which is physically much lower, is a place called the Pool of Siloam, which is similar to Bethesda because it is also a mikvah. But it was generated by Hezekiah. Inside this peninsula, where for years there were always some Philistine tribe until David came, there was a river or a fountain called the Gihon. And the Gihon would supply water and nobody could get to it. David went made his men go through the tunnels to get into the city. It was the only way they could do it. Hezekiah, fearful of the same thing and the water being cut off or poisoned, used his builders to reroute. It's all in the Bible. What I'm telling you is all in the Bible. He rerouted that water supply inside the mountain, and it spilled out inside the walls of Jerusalem and made a pool called Siloam. They uncovered and found Siloam by accident, working on a sewage thing in 2008. And if you come with me, I'll take you to the Pool of Siloam. And this Pool of Siloam, there was a blind man. Up north was a lame man. Now is a blind man from birth. How do you know someone's blind from birth? It's not like a sign, blind from birth, please help. How do you know someone's blind from birth? Because when someone's blind, they just stare. They can't see. Right? They have glasses on, they have a stick, something. But blind from birth, I'm very sure, and I've seen it more than once, where people's eyes are completely receded. You can see there's nothing developed there. It's like it's way deep and it's just a little eyelash. You don't see any eyeball. Right? You've seen that. What's that guy that sings? He has that same thing going on there. Bocelli. He's one of the example. So he's got no eyeballs. Jesus looks at him and he goes, Let me think. I was at creation. He took dust. And then he formed it. That's what I'm missing, dust. He's missing eyeballs. So he started gathering dust. Now, how am I going to hold this together? Okay. And he started rolling it into an eyeball, pops it in. Another one, pops it in. And he says, go wash your eyes in the Pool of Siloam. And it was also on the Sabbath. And his eyes are open and goes through the same process. You can see how you lying, telling, where are your parents? And the parents said, we don't know, we just know that he was born blind. We don't. And the whole confusion, they didn't believe that he was actually the same person, that he was blind from birth. And you didn't know who healed him. Also on a Sabbath, all that, he's not allowed to heal on the Sabbath. All that same process. And these are the only two miracles named, both on Sabbath, both in the north and the south, in the two mikvahs. And I thought, what is the significance? You never told us why you did that. And John names it because there must be a reason for it, all of it. And then I found in 2 Samuel chapter 5, verse 9, it says, when King David arrives in Jerusalem for the first time, he's killed all the Philistines and overcome them over as he's got there. But the last of the Philistines were the Jebusites. And they were in Jerusalem, and they shouted down in this 2 Samuel 5, verse 9, they shouted down, you will not take this city. Even the blind man and the lame man will keep you out. So when the son of David came to Jerusalem, when the son of David came, he went to the north and he healed a lame man, looked for a lame man, healed one, and he went to the south, looked for a blind man, and no blind man nor lame man would keep the son of David out of the city. And did it on the Sabbath because he's Lord of the Sabbath. He did it, he conquered, he was the master. You didn't have to prove to anybody, but in the spirit world, he did things. Now, why I'm telling you this is because there's a lot of things that happen in your life you just don't understand. He never took time to explain to the people why he did it. One of the things that always perturbed me my whole life studying God's word, why would Jesus rebuke a fig tree? Curse it. Why would you curse a tree? Why? What did the tree do to you? The Bible says clearly it wasn't fig time in March. It's right before the Last Supper, right before Easter, right before he comes in Jerusalem. This fig tree goes hurriedly to it to go to look for fruit that is full of leaf. And the writer says in the scripture that it's only fruit time in October. We know the big figs come in October. But what you don't know is that those trees in Jerusalem have little figs when it comes with the leaves. They also produce little figs. They're not as tasty, but they use them sometimes for various things. And Jesus went there looking for those first fruits and found none and cursed the tree. Well, why would you curse the tree? Because it's symbolic. Once again, the same as the blind man, same as the lame man. He cursed the tree because that was Israel, They were called to be, sorry about that, guys, I didn't even know it was there. Jerusalem was called to make an impact upon the world. You must understand that Jerusalem, that the temple is, when Jesus overturned the tables, he said, my Father's house is a house of prayer for all nations. There's scripture after scripture about how that Jerusalem is supposed to be a place for all to come. And everything about Jerusalem is meant to be hospitable and welcoming to every nation on the face of the earth. It's not just for one chosen people. Do you understand what I'm saying? And so they fell down on their job. They did not take the kingdom of God to the rest of the world. He said, you brood of snakes. That's what he told them. You are not entering in, but you're forbidding, you're hindering those that should be entering in. You're making it difficult for those to enter the kingdom. Are you hearing me? Do you hear what I'm saying? Jesus never said if you sin, you'll go to hell. He never said that. He said you'll not enter the kingdom. And when sin has lasted a long time, it'll bring forth death. Because when you don't enter the kingdom, you will not become saved. You have to first embrace the kingdom. I haven't got time to teach you that. Just put that aside. Okay, now, I've got the pastor looking at me like, what? Poor man. Okay, he's a learned man. He's learned. He's like a scribe or a Pharisee or a man of future of the law. He knows the word. Anyway, let's go on. So I want you to understand today, in your life has had a history of very strange things. People have died. You lost your job, got sick. Things happen that you wonder, Because in your immaturity, you're trying to equate God's approval, disapproval, God's leading, God's involvement in your life with things that are positive and negative. And now he's dealing with you, and now he's not. That's immaturity. God is very expectant of our complete weaknesses and failures. Completely expectant, because he knows who we are. He knows that we are just dust. He knows that we are flesh. What is man that you're mindful of? God is very aware of our weakness. We have a blessing that was given to Aaron, was supposed to speak over the people. And it says, may the Lord bless you. That's not what it says at all. Because the Jews are so taught not to use God's name easily or idly, it actually says in Hebrew, his name, Yahweh. And Yahweh, in Hebrew, we read from the right to left, means I'm going to be, I am, and then I was. That's what his name actually means. You break the letters down. And Yahweh says, Yahweh bless you. And the blessing is a very direct, like an arrow, shooting at you good things. And may he bless you. And then it says, keep you. And the word Hebrew, keep, means to protect you from COVID, from sickness, from poverty, to keep you. May he uphold you. May he make things work for you. And there are 3 lines, and each have 2 verbs in it. And the second one is, may he make his light shine on you, which means we know from Jesus' teaching that when you walk in the light, you are safe. Walking in the light brings everything illuminated. When you walk in the dark, you fumble, you have difficulties spiritually. So may he cause his light to shine upon you, that you're always in a safe place, and may he give you grace. Now, the grace we talk about in Hebrew is not the grace you understand, the way you talk about mercy and grace. The grace is being mindful of how pitiful we are. It's like an ant walking across the table. You could squash it with a finger and not feel a thing. And that's how we are in the presence of God. May you show us grace and realize that we're just nothing without you. That's what it means. The third line is that may you make his face shine upon you. And that's important to us Jews, because we cannot see God who will die. That you see so many people that thought they saw God and they panicked because they're going to die now. Because you cannot look at his face and live. But he makes his face to shine upon you, means he pays attention to you, and he's going to do all that's good for you. May he make his face shine upon you and give you shalom, which is more than peace. Shalom is total state of well-being, of good night's sleep, of feeling well with yourself and having a good self-image. It's more than just peace. It is a total. When you say to someone, Shalom Aleichem, when you greet them, you are speaking that state of well-being over them. We've learned to bless and not curse. Boy, you're an excited bunch. Do you know that not one of you are here by chance? Every one of you are specifically planned by God to be here this morning. God is far more in control of your life than you are. If you ever were born again and gave God charge of your life, don't measure it by struggling to get parking in front of the grocery store. Don't measure it by the difficulties or mishaps of your life, because everybody goes through, whether you're Christian or not, goes through mishaps. In fact, the rain falls on the righteous and the unrighteous. And there are people of faith that teach faith that still try to equate and explain and understand. And it makes me, as a Jew, laugh at these people, because his ways are higher than our ways. How are you, in your pitiful little brain, going to understand God's ways? As I said yesterday, God has dumbed the Bible down as much as he possibly can for us. I mean, think about it. In the garden, there were 2 trees. What are we, kindergarten? Children? What's that all about? Why is it 2 trees? Why must you name it's the whole thing? It's like a baby talk, because it's all we can cope with. And Jesus said, I have a lot more to tell you, more than you can now bear. You can't handle the truth. That's not biblical. Okay, but you cannot handle what God says. You struggle because we want what we want. We haven't yielded to him. Not one person in this room, not one, including myself, is completely yielded to the Lord. It's a whole process. Not one person will do whatever he says. Not one person in this room. David was a man after God's own heart, and he had the worst character issues. He had all these, it's not like he was stuck with a wife that was just lost her young, beautiful years. He had a whole bunch of them. wives and concubines, and he saw this woman out there bathing, and I'm going to ask her one day, what the heck did your mother teach you bathing out there where the king can see you? What's that all about? She's bathing out there, and he didn't just, well, I couldn't help myself. No, he asked, hey, come here. Who's that? He inquired. And then he told her, well, that's Uriah's wife, married. Oh, you see, so he's inquired, he inquired, and now he sends for her. King, why are you sending for her? I told you she's married. I'm not going to do anything. Don't you trust me? My kids used to always ask me that. Don't you trust me? I don't trust myself. Why would I trust you? Are you hearing me? And so he sends for her. That's not enough that he does that terrible thing and makes her pregnant. He's covering it up. This is the man after God's own heart. And when God took him to task, he didn't say, I'm punishing you, dealing with you because you committed adultery. He doesn't even mention it. He says, because you killed Uriah with the hand of the Philistines. That's what God had against him. That was so unjust, killing an innocent blood. God hates the shedding of innocent blood. And then he was the worst father. This idiot, Absalom, is trying to destroy not only his father, but his whole father's kingdom. And you'd think that he'd get a clue. So when he gets killed and his hair's caught and they chop his head off, this man, David, grieves for this idiot son so badly that his captain of his army says, if you don't stop grieving, we're going to leave you. We've had enough of this now. It became so offensive to his army. This is the king that God says, a man after my own heart. Well, what do you think made him a man after God's own heart? I'm getting ready to tell you, or as we say in Texas, I'm fiction to tell you. In the book of Acts 13:22, it says, after removing Saul as king, God gave them David, son of Jesse, testifying of him, saying, I have found David, a man after my own heart, because he will do everything I ask him. He will do everything I ask him. Not one person in this room will do everything God asks him. The bottom of the food chain of obedience, the most fundamental obedient thing you could possibly do is tithe. And we have a very low percentage of people that really tithe. Money is such a blockage, and that is why God gave you tithe. It was that was amazing, very clear biblical teaching and truth from a Gentile. Perfect. Because tithing is not something you do or don't do. It's something that if you have any inclination towards God, it's the most natural instinct to tithe. You should. Because you're telling God who's the boss. He's the boss. He's the one that gave it to you in the first place, and he will always take care of you. If you don't do it. Now in America, we've been attacked. I want you to know we've been attacked. The church, this used to be the most Christian country in the world. We used to have 26% born-again confessing believers. I think we have like 6 point something now. So, but in all fairness, we've also been diluted. We've had 3 million people legally naturalized every year. So you take 20 years, you've got 60 million people that have come here that didn't come here with our heart, with our vision. I'm very American. I am very American. If someone complains about this nation, even if they're born here, I always tell them, if they're total strangers even, please feel free to leave. If you don't like America, just go. Because I don't want to hear it. When I go to Germany, they always want to attack something in America, and I voice it, I shout them down, because this is a very blessed, godly country. It's founded on the things of God. It's not a Muslim country. It is a Christian country. I don't see in my money, in Allah we trust. I see in God we trust. Our forefathers built this nation and made it successful and great because they put God first. Now, in your walk with the Lord, if you have a difficulty giving to God financially, you will never learn to obey Him with spiritual things. Never, 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 never. So I want to challenge you and invite you to become like David, to become one like him that will do whatever God asks you to do. David even did what he thought God asked him to do. If you do something and you thought God told you to do it, and you really meant it from your heart, and if it wasn't God, He's still going to bless it. Because you did it from your heart. He looks at the heart. Men look at the outside, God looks on the inside. It's all about your heart. Even when you mess up and do stupid things, if your heart's right, God is drawn to humble people like a magnet. Not humble and righteous, good, sinless people. No, humble, just humble. You can be as messed up as tomorrow all day, but if you've got a humble heart, God cannot leave you alone. You can be the most wonderful Christian that has got arrogance and pride, and God has awkwardness getting around you. He doesn't want to be around you. He resists the proud. Okay, so now getting back to what I was teaching you is God is very involved in your life. So don't be over-analytical because you don't know. If you knew everything God was doing, you wouldn't need to trust him. A lot of what God does, it doesn't make sense. Do you understand? In your intimacy and walk with the Lord, you learn to be led by him, but the first check is, am I really willing to do whatever he says? Is he really boss of my life? Or I just want to fit him to give him peace? And God's tolerant and very patient, waiting for you to render piece by piece as you go along in your life. That's the whole journey. He told me years ago he loves the gray years. Because all your life you've got everything else is more important until you gray. Now he becomes more important to you. As you get older, you're not chasing something. You're letting God have his way. And so he looks forward to the latter part of your life, the evening of your life, because now you have time for God and you're more perceptible to his plans and what he wants from you. Please don't be too excited. It's overwhelming. There are a lot of dynamic people. For the amount of people in this church, there's a high percentage of dynamic people and a high percentage of people that are a little messed up, which is okay because God never called people that weren't. He always called the messed up and dealt with it. If you come with me to Israel, you'll learn a lot about the relationships that he had. The 12 disciples were fascinating people, well selected. To give you one example, just one. Matthew, the whole lake area of Galilee is a different culture to the rest of the nation. It's 700 feet below sea level, so the climate is different. It's warmer and it's full of blue-collar people that are farmers. They farm with olives and with wine. They do fishing there. They do all the cultural things there. They're not highly sophisticated, educated, like Jerusalem, the more hustling and bustling. And so when they had synagogues in different little villages and towns, they would go to synagogue, but there wouldn't be a lot of people that would speak or read well Hebrew. They just didn't have time to go to schools like that. So Matthew, to be a tax collector, had to be able to speak Hebrew, Greek, and the language of the Romans, because he was working for the Romans. And he had to be mathematically educated. And I know that his name is Matthew, and Mark refers to him as Matthew Levi, which means it comes from a very Jewish family that were being devoted to the Levitical order. And they probably sent him to school and paid for his school so he become a rabbi or something like that. And to the disappointment, he now becomes a tax collector. A tax collector is a nightmare for a Jew because now they're taking from their own people money. And that is the worst thing. It's the most embarrassing, ashamed. They were ashamed of him as a tax collector. And so Jesus calls him at the booth. He said, follow me. He comes and he follows Jesus. And that night he has a banquet for Jesus. And people walk by and say, who is this Jesus going to this banquet with sinners and tax collectors? And now, why wasn't Matthew's parents there? Because they were estranged from him. That's why he didn't call himself Matthew Levi anymore. He had a brother called James, not the brother of Jesus and not the James and John, another James, one of the 12 disciples, who had the same father as Matthew. So he not only became a Christian after becoming a tax collector, he also dragged his brother into it too. He must have really had a tension with his parents all his life, that same Matthew. Matthew wrote his book, or his disciples wrote his book, Matthew, in Hebrew, as some of them did, and then many were written in Greek, but they found a completely fresh new Hebrew copy 200 years after Matthew, which means that he specifically aimed his gospel for the Jews. He was trying to, what it was installed in him as a family member, it was installed to be one that we care about the Jewish faith, and he spent most of his book of Matthew trying to prove that Jesus was the Messiah they were all looking for, what we call messianic prophecies. That was his emphasis in the book of Matthew. He was very dramatic, and they were always trying to explode everything. When Jesus rose from the grave, Matthew's the only one that gives an account of the graves opening up and dead people coming out of the graves when Christ did. So no one else talks about that. I think an event that big would have been recorded somewhere else too, but Matthew puts it in his book, and he's very interesting personality. Just thought you might like to know all these things. Peter, you remember Peter? He didn't come from Capernaum, as you call Capernaum. He came from Bethsaida, which is a town on the river that spills into Galilee, and that's where those disciples came from. And he had a house in Capernaum. Well, he's too young at 24 to have a house. He marries a woman, and his mother-in-law is living with him. Well, her mother-in-law only lives with you because dad's dead. And if you're living in that house, and it's a big house, it's probably your father-in-law's house, and he died. And so you're living with a mother-in-law instead of her living with you, and that's what became the home of Jesus too. And Jesus healed the mother-in-law who was sick, and they waited on him. All those cultures that you understand how it worked, if you start seeing those things, you'll understand the interaction with Jesus and his disciples and their personalities. And you'll start understanding the words when he talks to his disciples, what he's saying. Bartholomew was a very ardent man of God. He comes walking to Jesus and said, look, a man without any guile. I saw you under the tree. And he's the first one to say, you're the Son of God. He's the first one to say that. And he says, don't marvel at this. This is nothing compared to what you guys are going to do. And these are very interesting interactions with all these people. Judas was from Iscariot. He's the only one not from Galilee. And he did the books. Matthew should have done the books because he's the one who was educated for it in it. But God wanted to expose and give Mr. Judas an excuse to show his heart. Because money will always show your heart. God will watch what you can do with money. He'll give you money to see what you'll do with it. It's watching to expose always the motives of your heart. Funny thing, that money. Am I boring you yet? You're so nice. Teaching of the Word of God. I'm a teacher, can you tell? I'm a rabbi. I always got in trouble for my Jewish sense of humor. The Jews we have our own culture, our own language. You can never get a decent answer from a Jew. He doesn't answer you, he's not going to answer you. So, Izzy, how are you? You should ask how I am. That's the answer we get, And we're the professional guilters. We can know how to guilt you. Don't come Thanksgiving. It's okay. I know you're very busy, and I understand. You just cannot, you don't have time. It may be my last Thanksgiving. We never know what tomorrow holds, but at least I know that you're happy. So don't come. It's okay. I understand. We know how to guilt you, and we're professional at it. Oh boy, you are such happy people.